We're in Bellingham, Washington to test the latest Enduro bikes, and given that Transition is also in Bellingham and also has a brand new Enduro bike, we pretty much had to have it. There's only one catch. It's not going to be available until later in the fall or even in the winter. Now that that's out of the way, this is Transition's new Patrol Carbon, one of 3 mullet-wheeled bikes at this field test. If you've seen the already released aluminum Patrol, it's a similar story here. 160 millimeters of rear wheel travel from their giddy up layout, and there's a 160 millimeter travel fork up front, but the frame can even accept a dual crown fork if you're looking to go that way. Other things to point out include a geometry adjusting flip chip at the lower shock mount, a full-length 1.5 inch head tube that allows for all sorts of setup options, ISCG tabs, good frame protection, and there's plenty of room for a large bottle inside the front triangle. How much does this cost? Our build would come out at around $6,600 American, but that might change by the time the Patrol Carbon is available down the road. We've liked previous versions of the Patrol, so let's find out how this new model giddies up on the trail. All right, so those are all the details for the new Transition Patrol Carbon. It's time to talk about how this thing performs out on the trail. And looking at this thing, this is definitely the most descent-focused Patrol that they've done, for sure. It's got a mullet wheel in the back, the thing is super slack, but we gotta talk about climbing first. Do you think that hurts the bike? Like, when you're climbing this thing, is it a pain in the ass?
It's somewhere in the middle of all the bikes we had, so it actually wasn't too bad. If you're looking at it and you see it's super slack and you see it's really descent-focused, you'd think it would take away more than it actually did, and it wasn't the snappiest climber, but it felt completely fine. It had a moderate to medium amount of bobbing, I would say, so the suspension did soak up a little bit of the energy, but it wasn't bad by any means, and it felt still slightly energetic getting up the hill. And it was also the lightest bike on test, so that definitely helped to get up the hills.
What about you, Matt? Relative to these other Enduro bikes here, I think the others were all heavier. This one has a smaller rear wheel than some of the others. How did this thing climb compared to those other bikes?
You know, when you go for the Patrol Carbon, you're going in for the mullet haircut. So you have to accept that the smaller rear wheel is not going to roll over things or have quite the same amount of traction.
Yeah.
But it is a light bike. It does have a nice steep seat angle. It was relatively easy to climb, had good amount of traction, a little bit more bob,
yeah,
but that does equate to some grip as well.
Yeah. I was listening to you guys out on the trail, and it sounded like you could tell that this bike was lighter than some of the others. So my question for you guys is, if you were out for a huge ride on a big travel bike like this, is this the bike that you would want to be on over the others, or?
It's definitely in the top few for me. There were a few that really stood out as pretty capable climbers compared to the rest, and on pretty much any trail, like this one climbed pretty well around switchbacks. It's a really agile bike, and I think that helped it feel like not a ton of work to carry.
Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yep, totally. I think it's a bike that you could ride all day. Uphill, it's very comfortable. You feel like upright, you're not slouching over the back, but then has a slack head angle as well, plus the lightweight. Yeah, right. you can go all day on this.
All right, let's move on. That's enough about climbing. Let's talk about what everybody wants to hear, how this bike descends. Matt, what about you? I saw you out there when we were filming. You were definitely going huge on this thing. Tell me about the suspension.
Yeah, I played around with that a little bit. First, I started a little softer, and I found a lot of the weight was shifted to the back. That allowed the rear wheel to grip really well, and the bike definitely settled in the travel a little more.
Yeah.
But it kind of unweighted the front and made it a little bit more twitchy. So I kind of bumped up the rear suspension to a higher pressure, and that kind of gave me that harder platform to push against and like push into bumps, push into compressions, get some more pop out of the bike.
Just because I want to get a little nerdy, how many PSIs are you changing here? Like, is it like 5 PSI, 10 PSI to change a character of a bike like that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a better way to look at it is the sag percentage.
Right.
So yeah, I started a little bit lower, just on the high side of 30, and then went to the lower side of that. So between 32 and 28% sag is roughly where I was.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the other end of the travel. When you were running more than 30% sag, did you find that the bike bottomed out too much? Did you maybe need a little bit less air volume in the shock, or how did that work?
It definitely rode a little bit lower with the lower pressure, obviously, but I never found any harsh bottom outs. It was more so the mid-stroke where I wanted to push into the bike, and with that higher pressure, I could hit that ramp a little quicker, but it never got kicky or anything.
Yeah. Let's move on to handling now. Alicia, small wheel, slack bike. I bet
Small
this
wheel,
thing
slack
felt
bike.
pretty good when it was steep and fast.
Yeah, steep and fast. This bike had really easy, quick, agile handling, which I really appreciated in a lot of the terrain that we were riding here in Bellingham. I think the small wheel really contributed to that. It was maybe the quickest, if not one of the quickest, bikes to change direction and just change lines, hop around a little bit, which felt just so fun to ride. It's also, I was thinking the bike that if, say, there's one of those like many steep chutes that sort of ends in a G out corner, quick direction change, and you have to make it into that rut and make the corner, this might be the bike I would most want to ride down something like that. Like, I just trust it to change direction exactly where I want it to and kind of just pop down the trail in a really playful way, which is fun.
It's interesting because it sounds like it's both capable when it's steep and fast and rough, but you're also using words like playful and it's changing direction quickly. It almost sounds like Transition has managed to kind of find that fun middle line between a big forgiving enduro race bike and something that you could ride other places that don't have that rowdy terrain.
Totally, yeah. So when we talk about like straight line speed and just going fast over straight rough stuff, this isn't the fastest bike that we had, but it might be one of the most well-rounded, and I've kind of been talking about it as like the Bellingham lifestyle bike, where, I don't know, you want to like build a jump in the woods with your buddies and hit it a bunch of times.
Matt, Alicia says that this thing is a pretty well-rounded bike for what it is. Would you agree? And also, do you think that it also pays a price for that at the high end of the handling spectrum? Like when you're out there taking chances, could it be more capable if it wasn't as all-rounded? What do you think?
With the Patrol, if you kind of put that on like a radar chart, it is really hard to get away from the well-rounded feel. It just does everything really nicely, but it doesn't kind of stand out as one of those other high pivot bikes where it just gobbles up terrain. It does have a little bit more kickback on some of the higher speed bumps and doesn't have the stability of like a long wheelbase bike like their Spire.
Okay, Matt. We don't have a Spire here, but I'm just curious. Spire or Patrol?
I really liked the mullet setup on the Patrol. Yep. Yeah, I think that was a lot of fun, especially on these trails like you talked about, Alicia, steep and deep with like really nice ruts and yeah, just some like quality dirt here. So I can definitely see where this bike came from.
All right, let's move on to some of the component spec, talk about the highs and the lows. Alicia, tell me the spec stuff that you liked first.
I guess my highlight about the spec is those TRP brakes. They're so good, they're so consistent. The bite is exactly where it needs to be and always strong. They have enough power, they have enough modulation. Honestly, with those, it's hard for me to go wrong.
Matt, before we move on, let's talk about component spec stuff that you liked. Brakes too?
I love the brakes.
Tell me what you liked about them.
Very light action.
Yeah.
Consistent feeling, tons of power.
Would you consider TRP brakes over something from SRAM or Shimano?
I would. I think I would take those first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah. So that was a really good change, something different on there. I also really love the Fox suspension. It just, you know, they kind of hit the mark with the price point of this bike. They have the good suspension, good controls, and then just sort of middle of the road aluminum wheels and GX drivetrain. So you can kind of upgrade those as you go or if they wear out.
Right. Alicia, I heard that bike rattling on the trail. What's going on there?
So the one-up dropper post was great in almost every way. Really appreciate that they spec a post that's long enough and does work really well and really consistently, but it had a rattle, which did get annoying.
All right, and that wasn't the only rattle either, was it? You found the rear brake line was actually rattling against the frame. Easy to fix with you know, some rubber or whatever, but kind of annoying.
Yeah, it did make a little bit more noise than expected. And there's a lot of fans out there for external routing, and this is maybe one downside to that.
Yeah, all right.
Though it was cool that everything was internal except for that one rear brake, which I think if you're gonna sort of balance internal versus external, that's the way to do it for serviceability. Do you guys think that?
Yeah, good point.
Totally
Like, I
makes
think-
sense instead of trying to fish a line.
Yeah,
through
I
the
think that was a great call.
handles. Okay, let's move on to timed testing. Talk about some numbers here. Where did the Patrol pan out for you?
Yeah, so for me, the Patrol was actually right in the middle, so 4th out of the 7 bikes, right behind the Common Sol and right in front of the Santa Cruz, and those were all separated by just 1/10 of a second. So we had the Patrol 1/10 of a second behind the Common Sol and 1/10 of a second ahead of the Santa Cruz. I kind of attribute that to just a little less straight line speed than the Common Sol and a little more traction and like ability to maneuver consistently than the Santa Cruz.
Those numbers, they're so tight. I want to ask a more subjective question, like does it feel as fast as the other bikes on the trail? Do you feel like you have to put more effort into going fast?
It felt medium to me, honestly. Like, it doesn't take a lot of effort to ride. It's one of those bikes you can just get on and feel very comfortable riding. But it's also not one that felt really aggressive or racy, and it wasn't one that made me really want to like push the speed and like press hard into everything and yeah, go extra fast.
All right. What about you, Matt? I'm looking at the times and I see that the Patrol is 4 seconds slower than the high pivot Contra. So like on the trail, is it just a matter of like the Contra or those high pivot bikes are just easier to ride faster than the Patrol? Or why is there a big gap like that?
Yeah, you nailed it. It's just easier to ride faster in a straight line. And that's typically where you're achieving higher speeds.
Yeah.
So it just mutes everything and kind of makes it easier to ride subjectively.
Okay, but
faster.
Alicia, I saw your times. Now that Contra was the fastest for Matt, but that's not the story with you, is it?
Yeah, the Contra was actually slower for me, and I think that's because the Contra is just more work to ride. Like, for me, it takes a lot of upper body effort to get that thing down the trail. It's heavy, it doesn't carry momentum unless it is already up to speed.
Yeah.
And so if you're like trying to skip along a flat section, I really preferred the bikes with the skippy riding style. And so, yeah, for me, the Contra was a little bit slower. That said, if the test track was straight and rough and downhill, or even twisty and rough and steep downhill, the Contra definitely would have come out ahead.
All right.
Yeah, I think that kind of shows exactly what we feel versus what's measured. And the Patrol feels like a fast, fun bike because it's so light and easy to tip in and out of corners. And if that's what you're going for, then the Patrol is money.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, this is where we would usually talk about models and pricing, but while we're recording this Patrol Carbon is so new that, well, we don't have any models or pricing on the other bikes yet, but I imagine that there will be some. All right, we're gonna talk about pros and cons next. Alicia, let's start with the positive stuff first. It sounds like you like this thing.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest pro is just this is a really enjoyable bike to ride. It was developed here in Bellingham, so it makes a ton of sense that these guys developed the bike on their favorite trails here. They rode it on a bunch of steep stuff, a lot of rough stuff, some straight, some twisty, some jumps, kind of a little bit of everything. And that shows in how the bike rides. It's fun on everything, and it's just like, it's a good time.
It sounds like one of its strengths is that it's so versatile for being the type of bike that it is. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to have a bike, like a mountain bike, that can handle just about anything, this is a good one.
Mr. Beer, let's talk about some downsides to the new Patrol Carbon.
Well, like I mentioned before, it is sort of that well-rounded bike, except it's dedicated to 27.5 rear wheels only.
You can't put a 29 rear wheel on at all.
No.
Okay.
Doesn't go. So if you're looking for an all-out race bike, this might not be the one. It's also built with a 160 fork, although you can bump it to a 170 and also bump up the rear shock to 170 travel as well.
Okay.
So it can do a lot of different things for different people, but you're still stuck with that mullet configuration.
That brings us to, who the heck is this thing for? Who wants that mullet configuration all the time? And why are they wearing a Hawaiian shirt, Alicia?
Yeah, I mean, do you own multiple Hawaiian shirts? This bike might be for you. But in seriousness, it is for the person who just wants to have a good time. Like, you can race enduro on it, you can absolutely show up, and the person I imagine riding this bike is the person at an enduro race, but they're not taking the race lines, they're taking all the side hits, they're just having a blast, and probably also going really fast, but that's not the point.
Okay, this thing sounds like it would be a ton of fun. And does that mean that it would also be a ton of fun in a bike park, maybe?
It could, but it does have that light feel because of the carbon frame. And they do offer this in an alloy version, which is considerably more heavy. So I could kind of see those two different avenues. If you want the big bruiser bike that kind of mutes things and holds you to the ground a little bit more, then that'd be the bike for you. If you want to ride trail more, then the carbon bike might suit that a little better.
All right. If you were going to an enduro race next weekend, would you pick the Patrol Carbon out of all these bikes?
It would definitely be high up there on the list. It is so light.
Putting them on the spot here.
It's aggressive, but it does have the 27.5 rear wheel. So if you're on board with that mullet party train, then yeah, you're kind of dedicated to that.
Yeah. All right, that is it for the Patrol Carbon. Let us know what you think of this bike in the comments below. Is this on your list to pick up, or is mullet bike not for you? And stay tuned because there's a whole bunch more review videos coming from this enduro bike field test in Bellingham.